Thanks, Rudy. Excited to dive in, so appreciate the thoughts and everyone's hard work. This is exciting because this is such a critical issue right now. And so I'm going to let Marijke, my co-moderator, introduce herself, and then we'll get into our panelists. So, Marijke.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be here today along with all of the library representatives. And I'm Marijke Visser, the Senior Policy Advocate with the Public Policy and Advocacy Office for the American Library Association.
Thanks, Marijke. So the reason we're trying to have this panel, as an economist, I like to see things through the lens of data, but sometimes data can only get you so far, and we need to understand what's actually happening on the ground to fill in the picture to actually make a holistic, policy recommendations to be able to address some of the exacerbation that's happening right now through COVID that has been kind of underlying in this digital divide issue for some time. And so I'm going to ask each of the panelists right now to introduce themselves, the purpose of their organization, who they serve, and what their signature digital inclusion program is, and then we'll dive into specific questions. So we'll start with Nicole, then Kate, Marian, Lisa, Misty, then Richard. So please, Nicole, kick it off.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nicole Umayam, and I'm the Digital Inclusion Library Consultant at the Arizona State Library, Archives, and Public Records. We are a division of the Arizona Secretary of State. It's a little tricky when I try to think about our one core digital inclusion project, because at the State Library, we really see digital equity as underlying all of the initiatives that we have in order to provide digital services and to support our library workforce. My department is called Library Development, and we empower Arizona public libraries through grants, through consultations, through training, through resources, and in some cases, through direct programming. So as you can imagine, with a number of different activities, we really set our sights on what digital equity looks like broadly when we support public libraries in starting or maintaining Wi-Fi hotspot lending, when we leverage E-rate funds to make sure that we have infrastructure coming into those buildings so they can serve the members of public, and when we empower our Arizona library staff to understand technology as well as broadband and how to teach digital literacy skills and web literacy skills to their patrons. We consider ourselves to be the helpers, and we also provide funding, importantly, from the Library Services and Technology Act from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, who also hold digital inclusion as a core priority.
Thanks, Nicole. Kate? Are you on? All right, well, moving on. Marian?
Hello, this is Marian. National Public Library's mission is to inspire reading, advance learning, and connect our community. Our mission embodies services focused on closing the digital divide in a predominantly urban community. I've been with the library now for 24 years, arriving just prior to the library receiving its first computers for the public, courtesy of the Gates Foundation. Since that time, we've installed hundreds of computers for the public throughout our library system with broadband access and robust training programs. And we've continued to add services that include free public Wi-Fi, adaptive technology, workforce development training with a jobs lab, laptop and tablet vending machines, and a self-paced online digital literacy learning platform. Our signature digital inclusion programs highlight our belief that everyone from youth to seniors can benefit from learning and using 21st century digital tools and services. The Studio NPL program provides underserved youth with experience in robotics, circuitry, and electronics, music and film production, and much more. Youth learn to go beyond being consumers to becoming digital creators and developers. The program is an official
please, because I can't talk to you now. It's too late. I'll meet you in the office, okay?
Expedition site. which brings every seventh grader in the school system to the studio for hands-on experiences. The program also includes training for teachers. The department that I manage was created to take digital inclusion programming beyond the walls of the library and out into the community. We've worked with families with school-age children receiving computers for the home for the first time through initiatives with our local public school system and with the local housing authority. Nashville Public Library was selected as a pilot with the HUD's Connect Home program. Our team led the digital literacy component of Connect Home Nashville. Pew Research finds that seniors are the demographic most likely to say they never go online, and that non-adoption is highly correlated with income. We pivoted our program to focus on seniors and primarily low-income seniors to address this need in our communities. We partner with with agencies and nonprofits in our community so that we can deliver digital inclusion programming to seniors where they live and where they are already receiving services. Both of these digital inclusion programs are funded primarily by local, city, and state government, federal grants, private foundation grants, and corporation grants. Lastly, I'll say that impactful skills building programs should offer training for different learning styles and different audiences, and they should teach cognitive as well as technical skills.
Thank you, Marian. That was very helpful. Lisa?
Hi, this is Lisa Shaw with the Maine State Library. My story is very similar to Nicole's, so I'll just say ditto to everything. I work with library development at the Maine State Library. My work is primarily with rural and small libraries throughout the state. So Maine has 256 recognized public libraries, and about 85% of those are classified as rural and small. They're all locally funded. So most of them get money from their municipality or through an endowment or fundraising, that sort of a thing. I also do workforce development, not just with the library staff, but also with the patrons and citizens that our libraries serve. So I partner quite a bit with our state workforce board and regional workforce boards, with the Department of Labor, with the Department of Ed, the university, community college systems. Our signature digital inclusion programs right now, and it is hard to pick just one, as Marian and Nicole have both pointed out. The Maine Digital Inclusion Initiative has been a really fantastic one that we've done in partnership with Susan Corbett, who I believe is on the board of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, but also heads up the National Digital Equity Center in Maine. And this has worked very well for our libraries because she has been able to provide volunteers to come into public libraries in 8 of our more rural counties in the state. They're all pretty rural, but the 8 most rural at first, and then she was able to build on that grant funding that she got to do that. That helped our libraries because our libraries have fantastic connectivity in Maine. Everybody has, unless they're one of the really far out islands, a minimum of 100 symmetrical fiber to the door. Most are going up to 1,000. A couple have 2,000. And so we have fantastic connectivity in the building and often equipment. But what our libraries in the rural areas tend to lack is the staff that's needed to provide this training. And so Maine Digital Inclusion Initiative has provided that. Our other big one that we're excited about right now is headed by the University of Maine flagship campus. And it's All Learning Counts. It's funded by the Lumina Foundation, and it's bringing digital credentials and badging, learning to people that are not able to get additional workforce training, either because of where they live or any other barrier, through the traditional higher ed steps. And our plan on that has been to bring the training to these people and let them work through at their own pace, at their own time. Obviously, The pandemic caused our libraries to have to shut down, and that's where we really started to see where the holes in all of this were. But those are the things that are actually working very well for us right now.
Very insightful. Everyone's been very insightful so far. There's a lot of follow-up questions I have, but we'll get through it through the panel. Misty? Are you on? Okay. Richard?
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Rich Reyes-Gavilan. I'm the Executive Director of the DC Public Library. I hope you all can hear me very well. We serve the 400,000 or 500,000 registered account holders in the District of Columbia, a city of about 700,000 people. Just for some context, almost 1 in 5 households in the District of Columbia do not have broadband access at home. So that's about 48,000 households, not individuals, but households, which is really a staggering number, especially when you consider that DC is a wealthy city and it's the nation's capital. And so the library plays, obviously, a very, very important role in connecting individuals to the internet. We've got so many great programs that it is difficult to talk about any one. We are reopening after a 3-year modernization our new Martin Luther King Library next month, and that's a 400,000 square foot. It's a digital playground as far as I'm concerned, with adaptive technologies and emerging technologies all in site-specific space. But back to this question about what is your signature program, and I would probably answer this today the way I would have answered it 20 years ago, which is just the amazing access. We've got a footprint of about 900,000 square feet across the city, and we've got about 1,000 computers that are wired and connected, and the use is still staggering. I remember when I was a young librarian, I said, well, at some point people are going to stop using computers in libraries because cost has made technology relatively cheap. But the fact is that we've not seen any ebb in the need for technology. And what we've seen over the past 4 months, of course, with all of our buildings being closed, and now most of them are open, but only in limited fashion, is that people who are looking to get information about their schools, people who are looking to apply for unemployment benefits, and you can't do that on a smartphone, they have been really, really left out. So my main concern right now, frankly, over the next year or so or longer, is how well will our buildings be able to meet the needs of a really desperate citizenry. And if our buildings can't meet the needs of our citizens, how do we get not just the access, but the devices, and then the training and education to people where they live? And that's really, I think, that's the rub, is getting to people where they are and doing that in a safe way, which is just not easy in a city, in any city, because you got so many people in them. So I'll leave it at that, but there's a lot to figure out.
Yeah, this is very helpful. And please, as we dive into this, and Marijke will definitely chime in, but we want you all to react to each other, because, again, having just us ask you questions is only going to give us some insights. You all are the experts on the ground. And so as we continue the conversation, if you have a reaction to what someone said, please either just raise your hand or just chime in. But I'm going to kind of dive in. Well, it looks like Kate might be on now. Kate, are you on? Okay. With the other people join, we will let them go. But right now, I want to kind of dive into I'm going to ask specifically to Miriam and Lisa, what are some of the core services you're offering through your digital inclusion efforts? So are you looking basically at like basic digital literacy? I know you touched upon this at the top, but are you doing specifically related to workforce training, job search tools? Miriam, I'd like to ask you first, and then maybe we'll have Lisa react.
I would say all of the above. We do workforce development training. We've had a job lab open since the recession, when we had so many people coming into the library who needed to apply for jobs for the first time online. We have, as I said, free public Wi-Fi, and that includes Wi-Fi training. We have different types of adaptive technology. We have laptop and tablet vending machines, and also a self-paced online digital literacy platform through a partnership with the Public Library Association. We have a branded digital learn site. And since COVID-19, we have applied for a CARES Act grant to start a computer, a laptop, and hotspot lending program, since most of those services we offer are not available to the public right now. So we're going to start that program. We're also boosting our Wi-Fi signals outside of our library buildings right now as well. So that's some of the things we're doing.
Gotcha. That's helpful. Lisa, do you have a reaction to that or something similar or different? Because you all are kind of looking at two different spaces, right? Like Nashville's like this growing like city, but Maine's a little more rural, obviously, and serves different communities. So how would you kind of react to that?
So a lot of that sounds pretty familiar to us. I work with a group of state library staff across the country on a group called Libs Work that focuses on workforce development in our libraries in our respective states. And so we do see that job seeking activity, people coming in to do a resume, fill out an application, that sort of a thing. Our group also goes one step further into workforce development, being a place where people can acquire skills that the workforce is needed if they need to upskill so that they can open a door either to higher education or to a better paying job. We also have seen cases in Maine where if there's a layoff somewhere, our career centers, which is the main marketing for the American Job Centers, have had to reduce their physical footprint over the last few years. So they used to be, I think, 28 around the state, and they're now down to like 10, if I'm not mistaken. And so the public libraries have got the physical location and the connectivity that, unfortunately, our workforce arm is missing in the state, or has had to cut back. And so if people need to go in for a rapid response session or trade adjustment assistance, anything like that that's happening, the library is probably where that's going to happen. The All Learning Counts project that we're working on is really looking at upskilling people through recognized badges in CompTIA, for example, or in medical assistant, places where we know there are good job opportunities in the state, but that people may lack the basic training or the demonstrable skills that they need, especially digital skills. The Maine Digital Inclusion Initiative is a little more open in that it allows people to come in and learn whatever they want. I need to learn how to use email. I need to learn how to operate an Excel spreadsheet or to get on social media and talk with my family, things like that.
Nicole, Richard, do you all have a reaction before I turn it over to Marijke?
Yeah, I was, somebody had mentioned the Wi-Fi lending program, which we didn't have great success in DC with the Wi-Fi lending program. We felt that, first of all, the return rate wasn't terrific for our devices. And secondarily, just the thought of giving somebody access to the internet, then taking it away, just seems kind of unreasonably cruel. So, you know, one of the things that we're doing in DC is looking to partner with the city's chief technology officer and a whole host of partners to figure out how to get that extra, you know, those extra feet into people's homes in a way that is equitable and thought of as a utility and more than just something that some people should have versus others. So, can someone talk a little bit about how successful that program has been for them?
Sure. Do you mean Wi-Fi hotspot lending specifically, Richard?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to bring this up a little bit later in the conversation, but at the State Library, we have supported a number of libraries in starting Wi-Fi hotspot lending. We started offering sub-grant funding for libraries back in 2017, and we've seen a lot of libraries want to continue that service year after year and continue to apply for these funding. In 2019, the Prescott Valley Public Library reported that Wi-Fi hotspots were the #1 most checked out item over all books and DVDs in 2019. And we also have the Peoria Public Library in the West Valley of Phoenix here that reports waiting lists of over 40 people per hotspot device. So the demand is not able to or the supply is not able to keep up with the demand in this case.
Right.
But when we talk about equity and what we see with trying to support hotspot lending throughout the state, for some libraries that have a lot of cell phone coverage and are able to purchase devices from vendors that offer discounted rates, their programs are more successful. They have happier users, and they're able to expand at a more sustainable rate versus that same amount of subgrant funding that goes to a rural location, fewer choices of providers, data caps that limit public use. So the amount of data that would be useful for 1 week checkout periods versus for one student at home. It's just an entirely different experience, and we end up having some libraries choose to not continue the program until they have better cell coverage.
You got to come in.
And we definitely see two different worlds with hotspot lending.
Yeah. Let's back up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicole, that was really insightful. Before we get to that, I wanted to introduce Misty, and then I'm going to turn it over to Marijke. Misty, thank you so much for joining us. If you could just, I think you had this ahead of time, introduce yourself in terms of the purpose of your organization, who you all serve, and quickly your signature digital inclusion program.
Well, I am Misty Hawkins, and I am currently the director of the Arkansas River Valley Regional Library System in Dardanelle, Arkansas. That's where our headquarters is. And we serve 4 counties in rural Arkansas. So in Franklin, Johnson, Logan, and Yell counties, and approximately about right under 90,000 people for 4 counties, and that's about 3,000 square miles. And in the past, I worked as a branch manager for 10 years at the Charleston Public Library, and we worked with the Ready to Code, Libraries Ready to Code initiative, and I feel like in my new position, we haven't really figured out where we're headed, but we know that we are ready to break ground, and we do not let our rural category stop us. And the fact that we do not have these access or the luxuries of, broadband infrastructure, we just keep on plugging in and trying to make sure that we are reaching out to our communities and making sure that we're getting the technologies in the hands of our patients.
I don't think so. I have a truck.
So.
Sorry, excuse us. Go ahead, Misty.
So I feel like in our 7 library branches, we have never let the lack of technology stop us. And we are currently looking at our hotspot lending programs.
We can move it 30 feet.
Really trying to,
the pole is.
In each of our branches.
The backup.
That will be our next phase. That's our plan for our next phase.
That's helpful, and I think this conversation is helpful in a sense because in some of my research, I found that African Americans are more likely to do resumes and cover letters on their smartphones, and I can't even imagine doing a cover letter on our smartphone. It's really difficult, and so having some of this access, this basic foundational piece, is just critical for economic mobility. Marijke, please, can you take it away?
Sure. So thank you, everybody, for that. Getting us into some of the high-level programs that you're running. We're hoping to spend the next little bit of time talking about how your programs are funded and how you sustain and scale them. I know in your intros you touched a little bit about getting state and federal and grant funding, but if you could think about where your primary funding source comes from and help us really understand how that works for your programs, and then thinking about how you've been able to sustain investments that you've made and then grow them, knowing that there's more and more needs now. So that's kind of our topic for the next few minutes or so. And we have some follow-up questions. But again, just to echo what Harin was saying in the beginning, to please feel free to treat this like a real roundtable where you're talking to each other and amongst yourselves in addition to answering our questions. Okay? And to get started, Nicole, you mentioned some LSTA funding, for example, that caught my ear. But do you want to just jump in and talk about it from the state and then the local levels in Arizona?
Absolutely. So LSTA stands for Library Services and Technology Act, and this is funding that is administered by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And through their Grants to State program, they direct that money to state libraries who can then support statewide services or choose to subgrant it out. I work on digital inclusion initiatives, and all of my projects are entirely funded by this LSTA funding that we have coming into the state. At the same time, in Arizona, we offer a number of subgrant opportunities to libraries to direct, design, and manage locally relevant projects. So this can look anything like supporting digital literacy trainers, building or expanding a computer lab, any number of public programming, and in some cases, expanding library Wi-Fi networks and library broadband connectivity through things like TV white space. And we've also had libraries choose to fund hotspot lending programs in conjunction with other programs through these LSTA subgrants. So for us, this federal funding is really critical for all of the projects that we do. We don't tend to apply for a lot of national grants because of this federal funding that we already have coming in. And that's how the bulk of our digital inclusion initiatives are funded.
Great. And please, go ahead.
I was going to say, I will piggyback on what Nicole said. LSTA funding is very important for our program too. We receive LSTA funding every year, and we've applied that to purchasing devices for our training classes. We have mobile labs that we furnished with LSTA funding that have tablets and laptops that we take out into the community. We've also used LSTA funding for staff. Last year, we received funding to provide 2 Spanish-speaking instructors that we were able to provide digital literacy training in the Spanish community, in the Hispanic community as well. We also receive a lot of private foundation funding for our senior digital inclusion program. There are several senior organizations in the community that support our program. And we've also applied for and received several corporate grants, including grants from Comcast and Google Fiber and Bank of America as well. And I will also add, while we're talking about partners, we do have a lot of funding partners, but we also have partners that provide programmatic support. They provide helpers in the classroom. They provide mentorship for people. So partners provide a range of services for our digital inclusion program.
It's that piece on the corporate, completing that partnership and funding is really interesting. I just wanted to step in 1 second. If you are not a panelist, can you please go on mute? Susan and Ellen, if you can hear me, can you please go on mute? Sorry, Marijke.
I am on mute. I am on mute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marijke.
Okay. So
I'm on mute, yeah.
Okay, Richard, we were wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the local funding and how that works with public libraries, because I think it's important for people to understand the impact of municipal funding on what library services you're able to provide. And thinking, you mentioned the building piece in particular, and I know the DC Public Library, I can't wait till it opens, but has been undergoing the renovations for a number of years. But could you talk, maybe add on a little bit about the building structure? I was curious of the point you were making earlier on that.
Sure. So, we've been really fortunate in DC over the past 10 years or so. There's been just an amazing investment in libraries by successive mayoral administrations. It is a real point of pride in the city. So the overwhelming amount of our funding has come from the city. Of course, we are the state library for Washington, D.C., so we do use LSTA funds for some of our more innovative programs. We do partner with corporations like Google and Comcast for specific programs. But I think the one thing that, to your question about the capital program, because the city has invested so much money in our capital projects, we really draw a line in terms of not moving forward with capital projects unless the city is going to be willing to do the ongoing investment in the operating. I've been in situations in the past where you get this beautiful new building, and then sorry, we have no money to put anything in it. So that's something that I and the library's board is really adamant about when we work with our elected officials. Is, hey, this is great. We're going to get a new 20,000 square foot branch. We also need, what we call the operating impact on the capital project. And that is really, really crucial. Again, it's in some ways, it's been an embarrassment of riches in Washington, D.C. There are very few large cities that have invested in libraries as D.C. has. But it's something, especially now as the downturn is imminent, we have to make sure that the ongoing investment within the buildings is there. And I think this is where where data comes into play here, where you can see where the need is the greatest for our digital inclusion efforts. And in a city like Washington, D.C., where you've got basically underserved communities of color concentrated in the eastern part of the city, it's pretty easy for us to know where we have to put our resources.
So I know a lot of this conversation revolves around just underlying funding. And Richard, you talked about like the planning piece. If you're not going to have support, why do it at all unless you know it's going to keep coming? And that's kind of where I want to touch on is, I wish I had a magic wand to help make it rain for you all to like build out the support you all need. But if funding is not an issue, what would be like your top two barriers to enacting a successfully scaled digital inclusion program? So Lisa, I want to start with you and then maybe get some reactions, because you all have to do a lot with very few resources, all of you.
Absolutely. That's always the biggest thing when we ask our libraries, what do you need? And they're like, money. And we're like, for what? I feel Richard's pain on a lot of things that he's mentioned. I was a library director at a rural library up north a few years ago. We did a hotspot lending program, and it was successful in the sense that everybody wanted it, but carrier strength is very limited in Maine. Certain areas only pick up certain carriers, and that's it. So not to belabor that problem too much, I guess I'm at a point with our digital literacy in Maine where hotspot lending has really become a Band-Aid. And I'm not saying it's not necessary. If you're bleeding, you need a bandage.
Right.
But we're bleeding very heavily. And I had a meeting with one of my other colleagues who's on an all Learning Counts grant-funded program with me on the low-income subcommittee. And they had a discussion recently with some of their people that are using this about getting some hotspots out to them so that they can continue their learning. And they said, don't bother. There's no carrier out here that's going to work. That's just not going to work for us. And so hotspot lending right now is getting to a point for us where it's taking more money than it's giving us in return for service. The Public Library Association had a really exciting grant opportunity recently for us to be able to let our libraries that are designated as rural and remote by IMLS standards to apply to get hotspots. The problem was that the carrier they were partnering with was Sprint, And where Sprint works in Maine and where the libraries are that qualify as rural and remote, those maps do not overlap. And so that's very frustrating. So that's one thing I would say is when we're putting out opportunities, grant funding or whatever, to give either a little more latitude for the libraries to know what carriers or what products or what things are going to work in their area. I know that there are people that want to partner and get their stuff out there, but they just may not work for where we are. And that's just frustrating. The other thing I think I would say is, we really need to focus on getting actual infrastructure out there. It's so hard to figure out which carriers are going to work in which part of the states. And in some parts, they don't work at all. It's not uncommon for people who work around the state in Maine, like I normally do, to carry two phones, the U.S. cellular phone and the Verizon phone, because one will work in one part of the state, but not the other, and vice versa. And we do have some highly optimistic carriers that are like, oh, we're bringing stuff to your area, but when we field test, it's just not working yet. I love our carriers, I love our providers, but we need some honesty and a kind of reality check about what's working where with geography. And I think the one thing that really worked well over the last few months that the FCC did is really pushing for libraries to be able to throw their signal as far as they could. That made a very big difference. We've kind of been behind that thinking in Maine for quite a while anyways, but people were kind of afraid that they were pushing the envelope there, and that's just huge. We've got so much geography, mountains and valleys and everything to cover here. So that was something that was really good. So give us more latitude, I would say, on what we can do with the connectivity that we've had. Give us more latitude in partnering and not depend so much on the hotspot lending, because that's just taking us around in circles.
Nicole, do you have a reaction to that or other barriers that are not funding related?
Yeah. Oh man, Lisa, you touched on so many things, and I really feel for those situations, and we see the exact same. How are we expanding the library's already stretched role that they have in this situation with the limited resources that they have? I was thinking back to 2018, because a lot of the issues that I was seeing back then when I first started doing this work are really coming to a head now during this crisis. And they continue to be some of the barriers that I'm observing. And I'd really say even if funding wasn't an issue, it's really the communication or the conversations and the communication that's going on at the local level that just has to continue to happen to really prove that there is demand and need for broadband connectivity to everybody's homes individually, and not just relying on public community anchor institutions. Because in rural parts of the state, we don't have 100 megs at all of our libraries. In 2018, we only had 25% of our libraries serving populations under 50,000, meeting the FCC's benchmark of 100 megabits per second. And we only had 11% of our libraries serving populations over 50%, meeting that threshold of 1 gigabyte per second. So the infrastructure itself isn't even up to speed to deliver some of the basic library services that are expected by a lot of patrons. So I would just flag that there's some conversations at the local level. I also was interested in 2018 as I was seeing more of a trend of public Wi-Fi being shut off after the library building itself was closed. And I thought that was an isolated instance at first, and I started to notice it more and more in conversations. And when I looked, I added questions to our annual public library survey, and the data showed that 50% of libraries shut the Wi-Fi off after business hours or only for an extended amount of hours. That data was from before the pandemic hit, and we did see a number of libraries go to 24/7 access or, be able to expand their hours in some way. We also saw libraries rapidly come up with solutions like extending their Wi-Fi out to the parking lot, repositioning routers, even buying new equipment to do that type of thing. But the reason why so many libraries had to struggle to get there was, it wasn't valued in the first place to be offering that sort of ubiquitous service.
Right.
I would like to respond to one thing Nicole
Please.
said, because we used to turn our Wi-Fi off after the library closed also. And one of the concerns that led to that decision was we didn't want to have children sitting around the library in some of the urban neighborhoods where we had libraries. We felt it might be dangerous. So that was one of the reasons we turned our Wi-Fi off when the buildings were closed. But since COVID-19, Wi-Fi has stayed on 24/7, and we're also purchasing signal boosters so we can increase our Wi-Fi outside of the library.
That's really interesting, Marian. This pandemic is trying to change the paradigm of a lot of things and how we view pieces. Marijke?
Yeah, we have one more question, but Nicole, I know from previous presentations that you've done and talking to you that you also work with some of the tribes in Arizona. And I was wondering if you could just touch on what they're experiencing in some of the more remote locations, and particularly around digital inclusion and digital literacy. But of course, the broadband access piece is part of all of that too. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about your experience on those topics, that would be great to add to the conversation.
Yes, well, it's a little bit difficult and actually impossible to talk about all tribal libraries in one fell swoop, because they're all, distinct. They all serve individual Native nations that exercise sovereignty over their lands and how they provide services. But in the ways that we are able to partner with tribal libraries to offer different public programming or to provide access to some of our resources, we've really found that to be a supportive relationship that we like to foster. The kind of heartbreaking thing that I've noticed in the past couple months that's hard to get out of my head is actually that some of our tribal library staff that we're in communication with and that we support through continuing education, through other services and professional development, they themselves don't have internet access at home. So it doesn't matter if we can come up with the best project or virtual conference if they don't have access to it in the first place. There's 1.3 million Arizonans who don't have broadband access at home, and a lot of those are library staff on tribal lands as well as in rural parts of the state and just in low-income areas in the valley. So a lot of those same connectivity issues expand for working with our tribal libraries as well. Before COVID, we also support like community archiving and digitization projects at the tribal libraries to really expand their role as culture keepers and access providers, where people from the public are able to learn the digital literacy skills needed to participate in telling one's own story and reclaiming records and their digital heritage, while also using the library as that critical piece for access to technology and the internet to doing those things.
I'll just jump in real quick just to say that one of the signature programs that I wasn't going to be able to talk about this morning was an IMLS funded program that DC Public Library's gotten called the Memory Lab, where we have been able to train a number of libraries across the country, including some rural and other libraries around personal digital archiving. And it's been just a phenomenally successful program, having people learn how to transfer these antiquated formats onto cloud storage has been just an incredible service that we've been offering for the past few years.
Absolutely. And Richard, we use the Memory Lab resources in our training because it's so well done. And I believe that was IMLS funded grant opportunity as well.
That's right. Yeah, those were a couple of big IMLS grants that we got for the Memory Lab.
Yes, and it may seem a little disconnected with the role of digitization and community archives and digital inclusion, but it's actually allowing libraries to one, expand their role, but I was just speaking with a community college library that serves the tribal community, and they have a lot of lectures that they had still on VHS tapes that they needed to rapidly digitize in order to support some of their distance education. There's also critical records that are related to the tribe and to the culture that can be preserved as well. And the time is really now for that to act.
Yeah, it's intricately involved with digital inclusion. I think having individuals develop the skills and the strength to work with these new technologies that they were unfamiliar with, I think it gives them a level of confidence to try new things and really just become better sort of digital citizens. So I think it's a huge component of an overall digital literacy program.
I would like to add this, and I think that Lisa, number one, you hit the nail on the head in so many different areas that it's hard for us to share because you basically said everything that we're thinking. But in Arkansas specifically, we have a terrible, we would just prefer to have competition with providers. There are limited number of providers, and so therefore there is no competition, and the people who actually have the businesses can charge whatever they want with the amount of service or lack thereof that they wish. And that applies to a cell phone coverage, that applies to the infrastructure of the internet, and so a lot of times we are at their mercy. And I give an example of just one of our branches, our library branches, just here recently, that we have fiber connectivity just in the past 2 years. 6 of our 7 library branches added fiber connectivity because of our E-rate funding. However, we were without internet for 1 week, no internet whatsoever, because they did not come, they would not send a service technician out to help us. And when you are you're just at their will. And that would not happen anywhere else. But when you're in a small and rural area, you're at their will. And so, I did notify management, and I told them that this is government funded and that this is, but it comes down to an issue of the service provider. Had we had other options, they would be a little bit more respectful.
Right. There's no accountability or transparency, Misty. That's a huge point. Thank you for bringing that up.
I think mapping would also help out with that a lot, because the fact that if the FCC had accurate mappings, then number one, library staff would not have to do this. We are using our administration, we are doing this work for them right now, and we're trying to do the proof of concept work. The hotspot lending programs, we are having to take these maps, and we are trying to assess this ourselves.
Wow.
And, in order to even do a hotspot lending program, I pulled out a bookmobile map from 1982, just to see what it would look like to put out possible options for a mobile beacon, like a mobile area of where it would look good to have a mobile wireless hotspot hub, where these were areas that were, and you're talking about 3,000 square miles.
That's really important. Thanks for bringing that up. I think it kind of brings us to our next point. Sorry, Marijke, go ahead.
Misty made me think, I think, Misty, that you were doing some partnerships around, particularly in response to libraries having to be closed because of the pandemic, and how to make sure families and children going to school and everything have access where they might have come into the library. So what can the library do now? And I think you might have been looking at some partnerships with local businesses to provide Wi-Fi access points. And your point about the traveling mobile made me think about that. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that partnership and then some other partnerships that have helped you scale what it is that you're trying to do to make sure people are connected and receiving this digital skills training.
Right. Well, and right now, unfortunately, this was a barrier for us specifically. I work, our regional library system, although we serve 90,000 people, our staff is very limited. And so we had some barriers in trying to get the IMLS, funding, and we ran into some barriers with the grant.gov, and, that was just a little bit more than we were able to do. But we would really like to, and we're working to try to do a kind of a hotspot hub where in between each of our library branches, we have a Wi-Fi spot where people can access the Wi-Fi without having to drive so far into town to try to get onto the Wi-Fi or connect. And we're trying to, we're working with the rural fire departments actually, because every small little community has a rural fire department. And you know that more than likely they're being watched by the community and it's safe, and it would take nothing to have equipment and a router and actually an antenna put and try to put the Wi-Fi on that, as opposed to using these hotspots that we're relying on a service provider that may not work.
That's real interesting. Jeez. I want to back up for a sec. Sorry, go ahead. Someone had another thought.
Go ahead.
I want to back up for a second and try to get maybe everyone to chime in here, because we're getting close to time, and it's such a meaty topic. We have a very limited amount of time to get to this. But if you, had your way, what do you think would be like the top 2 solutions in your mind to implement a successful skills building effort, through digital skills building effort through your library or your partnership? So I know a lot of you have thought about this. So again, funding not being an issue or aside of that, what do you think would be the top 2 solutions you would try to recommend implement either at the state or federal or local level? Marian, I'd love to get you to start that reaction and then go around to everyone.
I think for us, Harin, partnerships are key to scaling a successful program. We've been successful at acquiring, I want to say hundreds of programs, and I don't think I'd be wrong by saying that, hundreds of partners. We have, for example, partnerships with a local volunteer agency in the city that helps us supply the staff that we need to sustain and scale a program. It's a volunteer agency that provides staff from local tech companies lots of times to help us out. Also, I think that it's important to include training classes that take into account of the different learning styles that people have. So we offer a variety of training programs. We have formal classroom training. We have informal training where people sit around a table and learn skills. We also have mentoring programs, and we have an online learning program as well. The other thing I'll end by saying is I believe that successful programs also need to teach cognitive skills as well as technical skills, because surveys show that a lot of adults have devices and they have broadband access, but they don't feel competent or comfortable going beyond, say, email or reading a book or the news online. We have to teach them how to use these tools to improve and enhance their lives.
Thank you. That's really interesting, especially about the volunteer partnership piece. Richard?
Thanks. So, couple of things swimming in my head. I think we have one issue that I think lots of libraries have is that even when you've got money for training, you don't necessarily get the audience that you need or want to see in that training. And I think Marian just spoke to the fact that we need informal ways of doing things. So I think one solution that we're looking at the library is, and this is definitely funding, we'll need funding for it, is creating this sort of digital citizenry fellowship that will basically hire young men and women of color to become sort of digital ambassadors in parts of town that are, frankly, far from the library's doors. I think it's really a question of where we make the most impact is when we're not giving a class, but we're doing sort of one-on-one or on-demand training.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing this sort of on-demand training in a more sort of organic fashion, conducted by people who look, frankly, like the people who are the recipients of this training, I think is crucial. Just too many people are just, and the previous speaker made the same comment, too many individuals, I think, are comfortable with low levels of digital literacy. The fact is that, in order to become a productive person, you need more sophisticated, you just need more tools in the toolbox than a lot of people currently have. And that's why they end up, struggling to do basic work or just giving up and spending time looking at, cute cat videos on YouTube or something like that. So I think it really does require an army of trainers training people in new ways and training people, frankly, more often than not outside of our library walls.
So, Richard, have you all someone else probably done this in the past? Marian, you talked about other like volunteer digital fellows. Have you guys worked with like AmeriCorps or like Girls Who Code or Black Girls Who Code type efforts who like kind of do this and maybe build that off or build a partnership in that sense, and maybe the success or unsuccesses?
Oh yes, our studio NPL has partnerships with Girls Who Code and other STEM programs around the city.
Okay, Richard, sir.
Yeah, similarly, we've partnered with organizations that employ volunteers, but it's always been sort of finite, right? There's a program, you've got $25,000 and you're going to do this in this fiscal year and you're going to check the box and you're going to say, oh, you trained 2,500 people or whatever. You need something that just becomes more of your library program, also with, with better outcomes measurements too. So it's a more, basically more muscle behind the effort is what's required.
Yep, for sure. Lisa?
One of our most poster child towns for the change that library growth made for economic development in Maine is Millinocket. This is a town that was stamped dead when the mills were shut down. And one of the strongest supporters for getting that library back up and going was a person who had a business there in Millinocket. And I want to say it was around design and architecture. And this required moving big files up, not just down. And he told me that he actually had to put his files on a hard drive, put the hard drive on a bus, and send it up to Presque Isle to the closest place that had enough bandwidth to upload his files before the library came and was able to start really bringing some serious upload speed in. Whatever digital initiatives we're going to do, I really think you need to focus on the upload speed. We can consume, download probably with lower bandwidth, but that's not really community, economic, and workforce development. That kicks in when people are able to start moving things up. If we could do something here in Maine that would be quick and easy, I'd like to be able to have repeaters off of our building. I would market it in Maine as repeat after me or something, I don't know. But just to be able to get those high speeds out there. There are people who, Richard made the comment about cat videos, but there's actually a lot of people, one of my kids does this, who actually make their living off of YouTube and Twitch and things like that. And that requires good streaming speed, good upload speed. And that's income coming into their zip code that wasn't already circulating around there. So that's pretty important. I'd like to see our libraries be able to focus our collective buying power on electronic resources. If we're going to be looking at another shutdown, physical books suddenly were something that couldn't circulate quite so much. Learning courses, credentialing courses, things like that, and not just the sit and get, where you watch a video and there I learned something, but something two-way where people can be asking questions. It's been painful watching some of my colleagues have to try to do their work. We meet through Zoom or whatever, but they're also having to share their bandwidth with their kids who are having to do their schoolwork at the same time on that same bandwidth, and with a spouse who's also having to do work on it. And you really see the degradation of the connectivity and the signal over that. So I'd like to be able to see us focus more on the materials that people need to do their workforce development, to do their learning, to do their work. When I was director in Caribou, I had a gentleman come up as we were closing at the end of the day. He comes in every day, brought his laptop, brought his work with him. And because we had boosted our symmetrical speed in that library, he came over and said, I want to shake your hand. I can't get this kind of speed at home. I could not do my work if I didn't have this place to come into and do this. And that really just powered home the fact that there are a lot of people who aren't working in offices. We like to say in Maine, that you should be able to work where you live and not have to live where you work. And that's something that I guess I would just like to see. We have those good connectivities in our libraries. To what point can we be allowed to build out on that so that we're not shifting money over to that, and instead we can focus on what the actual materials are that people need?
Thank you. That's helpful. Misty, please.
For me, it's not necessarily about more funding. I would just like to better utilize the funding that we have. And if we are able to take advantage of the E-rate funding, I would like to be able to allow that funding to be used off-site, and possibly the entire cost of and I feel like that would be more beneficial than having to do the negotiations, and we would be able to use these funds off-site because, like previously mentioned, the library is outside of the library walls. We are not constrained to these four walls of the building, and libraries have gotten past that so much that our funding does not need to be structured just and limited just to the building. We do so many activities outside of our walls, and specifically with during COVID, our library buildings were shut and we still provided services. This shows, if nothing else, that we need to be able to go out into the communities, and we need the funding to be able to do this. My other side of this is economic development. That's one program that I have over the years that I've really seen how we as libraries, we need to pour into the economic development and give back to our businesses, because, people move to, I know for our library specifically, we rely on property taxes. People are not going to move here if they have nothing to do. We need to pour back into these businesses and really build them back up, because they have brought people here. And we are nothing without them either. So we partnered with Grow with Google like last year, and of course that was a huge thing. But we also have partnered with our chambers of commerce and economic developments across the state. And I think getting away from maybe just story time, quit learning about story time so much, and really
I love story time.
Businesses. So,
Misty, before I get to Nicole, I want to touch on one thing. You talked about leveraging current funding, particularly E-rate, and maybe you have a quick reaction. I've heard some libraries do this well and some others don't, but putting together E-rate IMLS funding to expand pieces, is that happening, do you think, on the ground, or people just don't know what's out there? There's too much asymmetry of information?
We honestly, we would not be able to apply for E-rate funding if we did not have the Arkansas State Library to help us and to guide us, to fill out the paperwork and to help us. And that is for 7 libraries, again, within our region. And we are the oldest regional library in the state of Arkansas. And without the state library helping us, we wouldn't get state funding, or we wouldn't get the E-rate funding. And so I think about that, like, it is solely dependent upon somebody else helping us get this funding.
It's just too complicated?
It's so complicated.
Yeah, yep.
It's so complicated.
Nicole, please, your top 2 solutions here.
Sure. Well, one thing to kind of, it's sort of related to E-rate and libraries trying to figure out what else can I do? And that's really such a great part about libraries is that they are just devoted to their public and to their communities and, you know, want to do the absolute most. We've had libraries in Globe, Arizona turn on a dime once the library building had to shut down. It became a school meal distribution center right away. We had other libraries know that the public relies on computers, and when they had to shut the public down, or their public access computers down, they found a way to get those computers one-on-one to people in the parking lot, cleaning everything down, making sure people still had those access. So the most important resource of libraries is the librarians and the staff. They are the reason why anything gets off the ground in the first place. So we really have to be able to support them and their enthusiasm. We know E-rate funding is absolutely critical for getting broadband infrastructure there, but especially in the pandemic, I'm seeing more and more libraries excited about what does a community network look like? How can I expand the signal even further? And trying to keep up with the FCC guidance on what is and isn't allowed, trying to maintain the momentum and the enthusiasm when the E-rate cycle is so long and isn't really great at proactive solutions or just getting a booster. We really need some of those negotiations. And at the same time, when I talk with tribal communities, knowing that they would have access to the spectrum that's over their tribal lands so that they can make their own informed decisions and control the airwaves that are on the tribal lands is really critical too. And we would welcome partnerships to be able to support those efforts that are made, those decisions made by the tribes. I also think a lot about libraries' role in broadband adoption, and this is beyond free Wi-Fi access. We are starting a pilot project called the Arizona Libraries Technology Access Phone Line, and this is a network of 5 librarians from throughout the state who I've hired on to provide phone-based tech support. So this isn't really, tech support is really the carrot, but it's actually a broadband adoption service. So these 5 staff members are also trained in where the discount internet offers are locally, where free Wi-Fi hotspots are, and where people can go to get cheaper computers, right? Or discount offers and cheap computers. So we know that in-person computer classes aren't happening. And so as that's moving more to online, people really need that one-on-one assistance. And we're really seeing that as the value. So we have people calling in to, we have a 91-year-old woman who calls in repeatedly to get help with sending text messages. We also have people asking how to do things with music editing software so they can create art. And we have people calling in asking, hey, where's the free Wi-Fi in Bisbee, Arizona? So these library staffs are really kind of expanding their own role and are becoming digital inclusion champions locally as well. And this model it's based on the National Digital Inclusion Alliance's Digital Navigators model, which is really just how are we getting people support one-on-one to be true adopters of internet, to feel like they have the skills as well as the affordable service and devices that meet those needs.
It's just key from all the conversation that libraries and library staffs are just magicians. They make things happen no matter what, which is fantastic. Marijke, please.
Absolutely. Right. That's really exciting to hear about that, because one of the things that we talk a lot about at ALA at the national level is kind of what are libraries seeing now with the pandemic in terms of programs that have had to pivot to virtual, and how do you provide the access to the people who came to the library and no longer can? And then how do you help people with digital skills and the adoption pieces virtually? And Nicole, you partly answered that, but I'm curious if other of the participants have any ideas about shifting to virtual. And maybe as we're building on that conversation, what programs do you think might stick, even as libraries are safely reopening, depending on their local circumstances? Anybody want to jump on that?
Yeah, I'll jump. This is Rich. I'll jump in real quick to say a couple of things. So when we closed back in mid-March and went to this sort of virtual digital posture, you know, at the highest level, it was a great news story. The use of the library was really robust. Circulation of library materials, you know, downloads, video streams, all this stuff was really great. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individual uses. But then you begin to unpack the data and you sit down with your data analyst, and they show that the discrepancy between, again, incomes of high need populations or populations that are underserved, the use was much less, much less, by a factor of 10, 15, 20 times sometimes. So all the use was just sort of being gobbled up by communities that probably don't need it as much as others, but clearly the libraries have a problem getting the word out, or we're not delivering the right content, or there are other factors at play. So the one bit of caution I give lots of people as they move to digital is that you are leaving more people behind when you go to digital now than you would be than we are otherwise when our buildings are open. It's a massive gap.
It's a really good point.
I agree. Of course, when our building shut down on March the 13th, March the 16th, we did switch to an online virtual programming, but that was more for staff morale almost. It really was. We switched to story times and stuff like that. But we have, especially in the past month, really gone back to using the phone, really calling and getting engaged with our customer base, because a lot of them are at home. They do not have access to the internet. They were not on social media to begin with. And if you didn't have a social media presence to begin with, there was you can't just build one automatically. You know, it was kind of, it was one of those things that it was either in place or it wasn't. However, things that have worked very well for us online, we book, like the book clubs. But if you think about it, those are very intimate as it is. So those are things that people, if they are engaging through Zoom or something like that, that was an intimate conversation between people anyway. So we are doing something for our regional system in the month of August, that we're doing Law Year in the library. So that is another thing that we've kind of switched over to more adult programming as opposed to trying to get the kids. But now a lot of our libraries are opening back up to the public just on a limited basis, and so people who need that face-to-face contact, they're ready to see that anyway. They're going to come in to get an item, with the protocols in place.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Some of what Misty is saying certainly resonates in Maine as well. A lot of my, especially coastal, rural libraries, in order to stay in touch with their patrons, because they really are a lifeline in so many ways, just beyond acquisitions of materials, went back to just calling patrons and checking in on them because they have no internet or computer at home. If they needed to do anything like that, they would come to the library. Maine's been very lucky, well, not lucky, it's been proactive, in that our community transmission rates have been very low for COVID and has been kind of showing a downward trend. So some of the small rural libraries have cautiously started to reopen because that's really the only way a lot of people in those areas were going to be able to access the things that they needed to. We also did a grow with Google that we were starting to launch last fall, and it was interesting. By the time they came to Maine, I asked them how they were advertising this program in rural states. And the girl that I asked said, well, she said, at first we were doing like Facebook posts and stuff, you know, and I said, how's that working out for you? Not too good. Rural states, people don't have access to that. She said they had to go back to radio and newspaper to get the word out. That's how people would find out and be able to come. So that's certainly very telling as to how you're going to do your programs. Our libraries were able to, through the state library, get access to several Zoom accounts. About half of our libraries are 501c3s that have a governing board or some variation thereof, and this allowed their boards to be able to continue meeting and conduct business without having to come together. But again, if you are someplace where you don't have that connectivity, you know, that's not going to work out so well. I do have some good data sets that I will email later on, but one number I want to just throw out is of our 256 public libraries, 107 of them are only accurately able to report their wireless usage for the last year. So we only count those numbers because bad data is worse than no data. And just of those 107 libraries, there were over 962,000 wireless sessions in Maine.
So this is all really helpful, and I have just so many more questions I would love to dive into, but we're running out of time here, and Rudy's going to cut me off. So real quick, lightning round. What would be all of your final takeaways for us as we've been trying to make recommendations to the FCC and their bully pulpit, either actions that you all would like to see take from this body or from the FCC? Just one last takeaway from your point of view. And I'll start with Nicole and Marian, then we'll go around, please.
You know, as I said previously, the best resource in libraries is the library staff. And I'd really like to see more investment in library staff's well-being and their technical skills as well, so that they're able to kind of be that model and be that anchor for the community locally. What we see at the state is that libraries are really empowered when they're able to provide local solutions to issues, and so statewide measures are sometimes difficult to implement. As I mentioned, you know, a subgrant for hotspots will only work in one area, but it's not a perfect solution for other areas. So really involving libraries in that conversation is really critical.
Thank you. Marian, please.
I agree with everything Nicole just said. I think also to provide that support to library staff and to sustain and expand on our digital literacy programming, we need permanent funding sources so that we're always running around trying to find funding to do this project or that project. It would be really great if we could take away that time we spend doing that and put it on our program.
Thank you. Richard, do you have a reaction, final takeaway?
You know, I think what's been said is great. You know, I think that given the opportunity to speak to someone at the SEC or elsewhere is just underscoring this idea that broadband really is a basic human right at this point. You know, we are at a time where it is like running water or electricity, and it's something that cannot be offered arbitrarily to those who have means versus those who don't, whether rural or urban, it doesn't matter. I think our jobs as librarians becomes that much easier once the access is facilitated. I think when we're put in the position of trying to be internet service providers by providing hotspots or something else, we're really out of our lane, and we're not really working at our best potential. So let's get people access, and let's let library staff do the training and the education, as I think we do really well.
It's a really, really good piece. Thank you. Misty?
I always challenge people to put themselves into our situations, into our shoes. What would you do with 25 meg? Like, what would you do with the standards that we have been given? Mm-hmm. And is that okay for your options? Like, if that is not okay for you to do the day-to-day work that you would do, then it's not okay for us. It's not okay for a library. It's substandard. And I like to put that out because a lot of times we wouldn't pay for services like that because we expect more. So, right. I try to challenge people to put their, put themselves into our shoes and walk in them for a little bit and to see what it's like working with no resources.
Very good point.
Harin, could I add one last point?
Please.
I think that what I would say to the FCC also is that broadband needs to be affordable for everyone. I know that there are low-cost plans available for those who are who meet the eligibility criteria, but I know an awful lot of working families who don't qualify for assistance, so they're not eligible for low-cost broadband, but their income is not high enough that they can afford broadband access. There's just people in the middle here that are being left out too.
Yep, that's happening in a lot of things right now, especially right now exacerbated by COVID. So thank you for bringing that up. Lisa and then Nicole will close this out. Or I guess Nicole, you already started. Lisa, please close this out.
My biggest thing is just we're so thankful for the speed that we do have coming to our libraries. We want everybody to be able to enjoy that. And so focus on upload speeds, not just download, and give us as much latitude to build on what we already have as possible. Richard and Nicole both made excellent points in that, we would like to focus what funding we do get, whether it's through grants or municipalities or whatever, on the people and the programs that are in our lane. Richard said that very well. And so we're not having to spend that money on Band-Aid solutions for just getting the basic connectivity out there, because that doesn't even begin the work of, digital literacy. So put the infrastructure there and let us do what we can, even if it's just for now building out on what we know we already have. And there is a question that I got from Cindy in the chat, and I don't know if you would, or I respond to it in the chat, or respond to it here.
And then I'll respond to it right now for everyone. I can read the question out loud so everyone has context. So Cindy asked her questions around marketing and outreach practices, particularly for the Latino community and communities who may be more Spanish-speaking dominant.
So I'll answer that for that question. In Maine, we have partnered with a lot of different agencies, again, through another Lumina Foundation funded initiative called Maine Spark. And it's anywhere from 50 to 65% credentialing by 2025. I think every state has seen some iteration of that. And that has included having navigators and first point of contact for, what we classify as new Mainers, or just reaching out to communities that are either coming like from Somalia or are already like people of color, or, in our cases, a couple of the tribes too. And, definitely having some librarians in place who can speak to this community has been a huge help. That's work we're doing on our end to diversify the profession itself. But also knowing that libraries are a first point of contact, we've been partnering across different agencies so that, when they come in, they're getting some help right away to say, I don't even know where to start. And so even if the librarian themselves cannot do it, if we have another agency that comes in that works with new Mainers or with migratory populations or anything like that, they're able to speak to that and help them. And that's not one more thing the librarian is sitting there going, oh my God, my annual report's due. I got to fill out my E-rate paperwork. You know, I've got a patron throwing a chair, et cetera. So that's how we make that work.
Well, before I pass this on to Rudy, wanted to say thank you all. This has been a very robust and interesting conversation. I have so many more, but this is a great foundational start. And thank you, Marijke, for all of your insight and help putting this together. You're very critical in getting this off the ground. So thank you. And Rudy, our esteemed leader, please take it away here.
Well, actually, thank you very much. This has been an incredibly enriching discussion. Exactly what we expected, a lot of great ideas. I see that we're at time. There are a lot of questions. I have at least like 4 or 5 questions I would love to ask. But in order for us to do something remarkable, and that is to stay on schedule, I will suspend with any further questions. But just to thank this entire group for such a really weighty discussion, a very meaningful discussion spanning a host of areas that we will have to consider and see how that fits into our framework as far as our mission to deliver recommendations, insights, and observations to the FCC. So thank you very much. What we do encourage you, because you all reference a lot of great things, to the extent you can follow up with some information, additional information on many of the programs that you've mentioned, we would love to receive those so we can ultimately, consider that and to include it in our report itself. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.